Who of you has coding experience with blockchain? Who has played with blockchain? Okay. Now you know a little bit the level I can address. For some of you, this will be an interesting one. Egbert, he comes from the beginning of the 90s with ISDN, digital telephony. But now he's in blockchain as well, so his boss asked him about should we do something about blockchain? It's a hype, it's in the magazines, and then he thinks, well, he says then, what color does the blockchain wants to, do you want to have the blockchain? But then his boss comes back again, asking, explain me now about bitcoins, because everybody knows they are 3 times more worth than a half year ago. And don't give me the condensed, simple version, I want the full technical explanation. So, and I'll do the same. Early civilizations has no concept of zero. Go. I won't go that deep, but I'm a little bit, one day a week, a professor at the Radboud. So it's partly a lecture I'll give this evening. But what I really try to do is to de-hype blockchain. But I'll get back on that one. This is really what is happening. It's really this Gartner hype cycle where the dissolution still is facing us. I mean, we are really in this phase. And if you do look on the price of Bitcoin, it's gone up really by a factor of 3. I sold actually my Bitcoins. I had about 400 euros and I sold them for 300 euros because I think this is really tulip mania. But who of you has Ether? That's gone up with a factor of 22 if you really were from the very beginning. Okay. Things goes down. Everyone here in Amsterdam with 400 years experience with the tulip mania knows what will happen at a certain moment. But we're not that far. Actually at home I found the computer of my son and he already had bitcoins in July 2012. About 5 of them he had. He sold about 3.5 ones for hardware. He still has 1.5, but he forgot his password. But really think about it. What is he? Satoshi, is he not a time traveler? Is he not a time traveler? I mean, the guy came here, proposed that document. Maybe he was living in a spaceship just to be able to communicate with internet to business, but never touched foot on Earth. Just to give us an idea of guys here on Earth, you're really crazy, this paper money and all these middlemen in between it. Just use this technology. He proposed this document, put some code on the internet. He has about 1 million bitcoins, and he's not touched them so far. So is he still around? I mean, practically 3 billion worth for working 2 years. How could that happen? You cannot even give him a Nobel Prize, whether it is Nobel Prize worthy what he has been doing. We'll see. But if time travel, I mentioned here a Tropanian artifact, we'll have to discuss. What I'll do in my presentation, a little bit about the fact that Bitcoin is really the killer app for blockchain. Blockchain is a technology like internet, TCP/IP protocols, just technologies. The disruptors are the applications. Social media on top of internet is the disruptor. So on top of blockchain, we really have to create these applications, and at a certain moment, someone will figure out what will be the killer ones, the disruptors. The Bitcoin is one. All of a sudden, coming out of outer space. Not really. What I'll try to explain to you that already in the 90s we were busy with other technologies like asymmetric keys, with Byzantine fault tolerances, all these kinds of things. which really came together in 2008. I'll go a little bit about the details and then I'll go on to what we are doing in the Netherlands. But realize that we are doing something fundamental. Mankind is not much smarter than several of the animals, and animals are also using tools. So why are we so much more successful than animals if they also have intelligence and have some tools? The only reason is we can organize what I call here plundering the earth in troops. Apes can do it in a group of about 50, and then the group comes too large. Dolphins maybe 1,000, but they really not concentrate on it. We are now not an issue. We had cities, tribes, these kind of things. But now with internet, we can organize something in the billions, exchange information. And that's quite remarkable. But there is one thing wrong with internet at this moment. There is no digital trust on internet. I mean, if you know someone and then start communicating this email, you still know the person. But if you start communicating with someone else, it could be anything. In the beginning of internet, there was this cartoon in the New York, one of the New York magazines. On the internet, no one knows you're a dog. The other party can be just a dog typing on a keyboard. You don't know. And why is that so important? If you start communicating with so many people and even start exchanging value, bitcoins, information with others, you really want to know who the other is. So somehow is the question, in the end, can we create digital trust? I mean, we have digital communication, and we don't have to have the warm communication of sitting next to someone else. You can communicate with someone virtually on the other side of the world, but we didn't have the trust yet. And that's really what is happening at this moment with blockchain. So, if you then position the development at this moment, we started, of course, with arithmetics like calculators, these kind of things. Then we created mainframe computers who could execute a lot of go-to statements, forbidden by the way, so we made them if then else constructs. And we were able to do planning and financing with those machines. In the 80s, we really started to create data together in a structure, and then we put the structures in databases, in records, and we were able to handle also a lot of data. What happened actually with all the more multi-processing type environments is really, and internet helped on that one, is that we also started to control between different computers, with the events, the states, the synchronization on it. And we are now at a phase that digitally we are going to create trust. So fundamentally, under blockchain and Bitcoin is this new way of interacting with others. And not only with digital trust, with others, also with entities, legal entities. And the ambition is also to be able to communicate with objects. Digital identifiers of objects. Another question, who of you has used PGP? Who of you received a PGP mail back? Ah, that's less. I used it as well, but I never got one back. You know where PGP stands for? Pretty good protection, and by the criminals, pretty great problems, because they decrypted it for the criminals with the PGP phones. Well, this is about asymmetric trust. I don't go into much in the details, I just use this particular picture, but one of the essential components of blockchain is this encryption mechanism with asymmetric keys, where you have a public key and a private key.
Excuse me, can you please talk a little bit more clearly to the microphone?
Okay, yes. And if I forget it again, just interrupt. This is an asymmetric key. Pretty difficult to explain. And the only way I do it is I give people for a few euros bitcoins, and then say to them, play with them, hoping that they lose their passphrase, and then start realizing, most guys, this is a little bit more difficult, you have to understand what you're doing. But the warning is already, I'm going to digital wallets, like the Loyal wallet and your digital passport and all these kind of things. And people have to learn to understand what they get with such a digital passport, and then acting on the internet, that they have to realize that they are now responsible for their passphrase. And if they lose them, they lose their ID. I'll spend a little bit more on the ICT part. This is the old situation in a company. You had the terminals, you had the mainframe computer, and you was working. Over the years, with internet getting it cheaper to communicate over longer distance, we got the cloud computing. So here, internet of bandwidth became cheap, but what's also happening at this moment is that storage is cheap. In blockchain, you are not having one central web server with a database behind it. In blockchain, everyone has the database with it. And that means if you update the database, you have to update it at everyone. So it requires blockchain a huge amount of communication, but with internet it hardly costs anything, so who cares? And it requires a lot of storage, doesn't matter. And because of all the encryption, it requires a lot of processing. What is new in this one? Why in blockchain? And that's the Byzantine fault tolerance. I'll explain in the next slide. In the 60s, 70s, on Apollos, they introduced 3 computers to take a decision if they had to throttle back the gas when they were landing on the moon or not. And they used 3 computers because if 2 would have the same answer and 3, then they knew this is the answer. But if one would break down, then they have an option that at least 1 out of the 3 was not answering the right. So with the other 2, they could take the decision. You cannot trust one computer, because if it's down, the lunar orbiter would crash on the moon. So at that moment, they introduced fault tolerance systems. And that's really functioning according to specifications. If, however, one of the computers is on purpose cheating, you get what they call Byzantine tolerance. And that was really theory, consensus theory out of the 90s, just like Zimmerman's PGP of 1991. These theories is also from the 90s. And what is this Byzantine tolerances? A general in Constantinople, those days, he was a traitor, so he sent to one of the army parts attack and the other one retreat, so they lost the battle. The question is, how can you avoid something like that? Well, you can avoid it if you would have in-between communication between these 2, because then they see, I have to attack, I have to repeat, oh, this is not right, some party is lying. So Byzantine's fault tolerance is really this additional communication between the different computers to make sure that all agree and that it is not one cheating in it. And of course with Bitcoin you don't want to have something like that. And these are really from already 83, all kinds of randomized Byzantines, generals, problems, all these theory which is being developed. Like, and if I go on even later on, and it was really this finally the paper by I'm going to be here on the peer-to-peer. There he combined the encryption with asymmetric keys together with this Byzantine tolerance problems, and that's no Nobel Prize worthy. Although no one knows who he is, and he doesn't then mention who he is. But this technology in blockchain is really the further on development since the 90s of a lot of technologies. And for example, in the Delft University, they have not something what is blockchain, they have that thing which is called trust chain, and it's already older than this Bitcoin technology. Although Bitcoin was more successful. What is the reason by this blockchain and the way how do these Byzantine tolerances? If you would have one web server in which you store everything, and that's the situation of today, then if you want to take decisions, you really want to be close to that machine. In high frequency trading, it's really valuable to be next to the machine. If you're a little bit further, you're a little bit later, and you're too late to take a decision. So if you really want to do something on one machine, this proximity is important. And why? Well, if you now want to do transactions on the blockchain, and you do a transaction here in Amsterdam and someone else does a transaction in Australia, it takes roughly a second later. Whereas the transaction itself can be executed in 5 milliseconds. So if on the blockchain we want to have how we call it in English, a proper view of all the transactions, and someone is in Australia, you don't want to have him continuously being locked out. So the way they're doing it in the Bitcoin or in the blockchain is create during 10 minutes a block. In Ethereum, they're doing it in 50 seconds. 50 seconds is also enough, but between 50 seconds and 10 minutes. And then if you take the decision, this is the next block, by collecting all the different transactions, also the different transactions from Australia, and you then have the center always at randomized somewhere on the world, you get an equal chance of creating the block. And in blockchain, it's about the mining the blocks. If there are, and then what you really see in this particular case, how it is being done, if there is a chain here, and then at the same moment there are two new blocks added to the chain, what you'll see is that you have two different chains, and then you get the longer, and the next moment later on, you have the situation that there is a new block added, and then you take the longest block because this block is not extended, this chain is not extended, this chain is extended, and this one wins. That's really the game, and actually, to in a certain sense, this Byzantine tolerancy that you cannot cheat it, and that you can do it in the proper moment is this block. I mentioned it already, I'm not sure, but yeah, this is the other solution. You could also create something that I always call that spaghetti code, and I hate it if I say that, but you can also have transactions themselves, and what you see here is this is a chain, this is a chain, and here you have a chain, so you really get, and then every transaction creates a certain amount of trust, and if you have enough transactions after each other, you can really trust what has happened there. It's a completely different way than blockchain, it's trust chain, but it is also around that time, 2000. Well, I don't know the real name at the moment, they called it now a trust chain. But that was developed at the Delft University, for example. And this note is really on this high frequency trading that you really want to have it on an equally based, that everyone can have a chance to win the race. So with this, on the previous slide I mentioned it already, Satoshi is not a time traveler, it's really technology which was on the way of being realized. So the question is now a little bit, if you accept that this technology is around, that we start to understand it, but it still has to be improved. I mean, there's still this discussion. Corba is a little bit out already. You have Hyperledger, Ethereum, since Ethereum Ethernet, Ethereum Enterprise, well, you know what has happened. The Ether price went up by a factor of more than 20 now. It's really a battle on who's going to win the code environment. But if we would go on to who's going to win this battle on the applications? If you go back in the 80s, roughly, it was IBM making a lot of fortune on mainframes. What happened with Moore's law, that mainframes became cheap, hardware. So the real moneymaker was at that moment Microsoft. Word would cost €1,000 and more, and hardware became cheaper. What really happened in the 90s was that bandwidth was monopolized by telecom operators, the monopoly position they had. So you paid a fortune for bandwidth. But thanks to internet, bandwidth has become really cheap. I mean, in the beginning of the 90s, it cost you maybe 10 cents to call someone here in the Netherlands, but it would cost you €5 if you would call someone in the US. With internet, it doesn't matter anymore. But the ones who are now making money is really the service providers. The Googles, the Ubers. And what has happened here really is that Moore's law made this hardware real cheap, and this Metcalfe's law, it was really the valuable network. The more connections you have, the more valuable it is. And if everyone passes along with you, then you can make a lot of money of it. What we really did there in the internet in the 90s was a situation that you had an app, that was the internet, and then you had a web portal with maybe a database behind it if you would enter something in it. Even in those days, it was not with DNS, but you really had a text table in which you wrote down that White House had this IP number, and you were able to access it. But again, it was one web server you could go to. I'm using this picture because the next one I'm going to show is with blockchain. But realize what I'm going to do now. This is internet, is really IP protocol, TCP IP protocol. On top of it, we had World Wide Web. with the HTML protocol. Actually, blockchain and smart contracts are about that level. So you can compare the phase we're now in is a little bit 1994. When Netscape was there and you started to have the first applications. And we know now 10 years later with the fixed network and then in 2007 with the mobile network, what has happened with all the web applications and the mobile applications. The question is, next to Bitcoins, what will be these disruptors as applications? In theory, what will happen is a little bit that even the power of the Googles and the Ubers, Uber and Airbnb are web server. Everyone does something through their web server. They grab a part of the money, become pretty rich, and others do the work for it. I mean, Uber is a taxi company without taxis, and Airbnb a hotel company without hotels, but they really to get a lot of margin in it. If we would put it on the blockchain, these apps, this middleman person is cut out of it. So the expectation really is that things will become, but really here is that we'll change these power of these few very, very rich getting American companies. You really have to change that with blockchain, that there is not that middleman anymore. And what you then get is that you much more, I call it here personalization as a challenge. There's personal banks, personal transport, all these kinds of things. Anyway, in blockchain, if you compare it back to the model of internet, you have here above your applications, then you have here the internet, and here you have the web services. What is happening in blockchain really is that there are different users or parties interested in what is happening on this blockchain, and this the last block they can update their own database and know what is happening with it. And above here you have the applications, they do a transaction. The transaction goes into the pool, and at a certain moment several of these transactions which are verified are really in the next block to go on. It looks quite a lot to the internet model, this whole blockchain, and in the end the applications on top of it. One example we are working on in the Netherlands is this container monitoring. Just to explain what's happening in Rotterdam, the next 2 hours they know exactly which ship will dock at the terminal. They can really plan it. They would love to plan it the next hour, the next 8 hours, because they need, for example, if you have 1,000 containers and you want to get them away out of Rotterdam, either on train or by lorry, you need to have 1,000 lorries there at that moment that ship is there. And there are so many containers going on, you can't wait them for 24 hours. Now everyone, the pilots for getting the ships into the harbor, the terminals, the customs, the lorry companies, the train companies, the freight companies, even the insurance of it, everyone is trying to get an actual update of the status of what's going to happen in the next few hours. So everyone has a database and communicates with someone else. You can imagine how many interfaces there are. If, however, you would say, let's put a virtual boundary around Rotterdam, and everything which is happening there is put on the blockchain. Then customs can read it, the terminals can read them, the lorry companies can read them. They can really change. Can you trust all these partners? Well, that's a challenge. I'll get back to that one. But this is the concept. If everyone, I go back to this picture, previous one. If everyone would update a little bit, okay, pilots will be at the ship at the right time and not delayed 2 hours, or now they are late 2 hours. If all these transactions are really on the blockchain, everyone can read the latest block, update his status, and does his own planning. Seeing that the ship is delayed, you can delay the lorries, or if it is earlier there, you can update it. This is the kind of applications where you can do something. But imagine now that the insurance on the ship of a container is a different one, a different bank behind it, than when it is in the crane. once the container is put on another transport means, like a lorry, it's a third insurance company. These people want to know who was responsible the moment something was wrong with that container. But they would love to see a blockchain which is immutable and irreversible. Now they depend on all kinds of web servers with different interfaces where someone can really toggle in that it was really the responsibility of someone else when this container went wrong. So there you have a situation where you have multiple parties in it, where you still could say, let's put with a harbor authority one web server on it, but then at the harbor they can punch in little dirty things. So this is a real type of applications where you want to have this blockchain. I wrote down a little bit in here, you have the different parties in it. The whole challenge now is with everybody with his proprietary solution, his legacy system, when are they willing to change over to blockchain? It's going to be a challenge. I mean, the current system is running fine, what is wrong with it? Don't break it. And then you come up with an explanation that blockchain is really ideal, solves all your problems. Now the way you have to do it is really to install between two parties a blockchain, replacing a point-to-point situation. But for a blockchain you really need a third party on it. This is really the permissioned environment, not the Bitcoin type blockchain, but permissioned nevertheless. And then later on you can gradually grow to it. This will take a couple of years. I mean, the startups, something new, grassroots, you can do things, but these are the big changes which we are facing now. Replacing Uber with a blockchain version, Airbnb with blockchain versions, might be even earlier, but these are the applications where legacy systems are really going to be replaced. Now, some of you will say, I'll explain this in more detail, but the message in this slide is you can use a central web server for it. Well, realize that is what's happening if you have two parties exchanging some information, point to point, yeah, guys, use a web server and agree upon it. But if you have more parties, you really want to have in the nearby future blockchain in it. For example, if you have, and certainly if you are transferring value. If you have some valuable item and there is really a third party for it, for example, if I'll take the vessel, is party one, there's a sea container, that's the item, and it goes to a terminal. It goes to a lorry, but it goes through the terminal. So you have already three parties in it. And then if customs wants to see what is happening, because they want to control it, you have a fourth party in it. So every transaction here in this one, if you put it on the blockchain, it's not anymore between two parties. Now there are more parties interested. And it's not restricted to Rotterdam, for example. If in the Eindhoven area we have a lot of suppliers for ASML and Philips and things like that, there's a machine and then there's a part produced and you want to send it to an assembler, or those companies who do the assembly, you need to have the transport, but you have also the tax office. Or another situation, a buyer, a seller, a bank in between, and then you have the tax office in between. So what I'm trying to say is that the initial reaction for a lot of situations will be, as that was one of the questions to Lawyer Garden, is, yeah, you can do that on a web server. Yes, you can. Well, the more complex it becomes, and that's a reality, you won't do it anymore if you are in a greenfield situation. Of course, there's still a lot of legacy you have to take care of, but in a greenfield situation, you really go to these, I mentioned it here, distributed ledger technologies, whether it's a blockchain or a trusting, doesn't matter. But these kind of technologies, which were introduced by surprise with Bitcoin and blockchain underneath it, they're going to be important in the next 10, 20 years. So this is really the evolution for the next decade, that we'll get to these smart services, leased things, all these kinds of developments. So now I want to get to the last point as a warning that blockchain it might seem as a hype, but really is more complicated than that. And that has all to do with what we now see as challenges, not only the operational issues of replacing legacy systems, but really this digital identities. Everyone now is a blockchain, application with multiple parties on it, which you can trust or not trust. Everyone does a transaction on it, and can you trust it? In Bitcoin, it's really your bit address. But what you really want to do is a digital identity. Now, you have an identity, and there are certain attributes with it. Your birthday, your name, and government will look to taxes, income, license, driving license, with someone else's your name and your email. You can have different partial views on an identity. And the challenge now is, can we standardize on these identities? And not only for people, also for legal entities, as well as objects. Now for people, you could say, let's create a digital passport, much more secure than DVD, for example. And for companies, it's really the Chamber of Commerce number. And for objects, it's still a challenge. Will you give it an IP version 4 number? Oh no. Give you an IP version 6 number? Not. No, you really want to give it a flexible length. But that's all the detailed discussions now. But if you would have identities, and you can give out identities, store that, and I'll explain that in a self-sovereign wallet, and use that one for all your blockchain applications, then the validators, or the miners really, can check whether your identity is valid, in the sense that has someone else issued you this identity. What you can expect a little bit, I try to explain it as simple as possible, but you have your attributes really in a wallet. There is someone who gave out your identity, for example government or a bank, and then there is a signed hash in it. In the sense that later on, when you want to start using it, you get your signed identity, signed in the sense that it is your attributes and the signing from someone else, that the miner here then, or the validator, can then check, okay, this person has this particular authority or issuer of an identity or a partial identity. Has he done that? Also, has he revoked it already? Is this identity still valid? Because if it is not valid, the transaction should not be in the blockchain. And then, of course, you get here in IP versions and domain names. It's always DNS. That's technology out of the 80s. Now we can do even the issuing of these kinds with blockchain, and then we get an identity blockchain. In the sense that it could be public authority giving out your digital passport, but it could also be banks or even an RWT for your license, your driving license. What you will have in the end then is really a situation that, for example, on a wallet, that could be a mobile phone, is already your bank account, is a digital driving license, and if you rent a car to go just from A to B, that you have a situation that you just get asked by the rental company to provide your ID. Well, you have your phone in it, you check, well, they should not know my name or things like that. They only want to know if I have a valid driving license, if I'm older than 80 years, for the driving license you have, and can I pay for it? I mean, keep it pretty simple. But you don't disclose all your identity, your complete identity. And that's one of the things you need to have in Europe, because this European Digital Data Right, the law of next year, means that if you have personal information on your computer from someone else, you are liable for it if there is a hack on it. Even if someone else wants to say, it says to you, you have to remove it, you have to remove it. That's completely different than the US. The US, if you click on the click checkbox, there is a contract behind it, and they can do everything with your data. In Europe, it's a law, and that's not the case. It's fundamentally different than in the US. So around these digital identities and putting personalized data on the blockchain, we are going to face some serious problems still. I mean, you will not put personal data on the blockchain. You try to do only transaction on the blockchain and keep as much data off-chain. And for those who are running a full Bitcoin site know that you have already more than 100 gig. Now can you imagine that if you have multiple, if you participate in multiple from the blockchains where they put everything on the chain, it won't work. So the whole strategy now is to put as less on the blockchain as possible, only the transactions and the IDs, which can be signed, so it's not that easy detected. we're coming a little bit to the conclusions. What we're doing now in the Netherlands, and that was the title of my presentation, what is blockchain in the polder? Well, at TNO we are already 4 years active with Bitcoin and blockchain. When the FBI and Dark Road and the Dark Web and Silk Road was active, Interpol approached us, help us with it. We don't understand. So already for 4 years we are helping Interpol with these traceability. I mean, money laundering, that they have bitcoins, that they go through a laundering machine. Even there we can trace back that it was the criminal who once received this criminal bitcoins and tried to cash them. I mean, you can really trace that back. And those are things we did already 4 years. Of course, we have multiple students we had running, creating Ethereum kind of applications. But at this moment, we are mostly involved in the Tech Corruption initiative. Tech Corruption is in Heerlen. Companies like APG, PGGM, this pension they put on the blockchain proof of concept. The banks, ABN AMRO, Rabo, Volksbank, but now ING participates in it. What we see is that the big companies at the moment all have done their homework. Even the DNB has done it. Playing around with an in-house type of application which you can start up with a few students, you put a few computers or Arduinos or Rhapsodies and you create your own blockchain network. But the problem is you have to work with others, and that's what we are now trying. In the harbor, there's this discussion now with several players. In the harbor, what do we need to do for this container things, all the trading around it. In here, we do it now for more or less customer to business type of applications. And in both situations, also here in Amsterdam, between the banks, there is also discussions, what should we do common, these kind of things. CWI and university are also a little bit involved in those discussions. Everyone is now trying to figure out how can I work together, because blockchain is only sensible if you do it with others. Whether you can trust them or not trust them, you have to do that with others. That's what we are doing now. And then we realized that if everyone would create their own solution on identity or identifying the parties on the blockchain, we said, well, everyone is going to have this problem. So that's where we now joined forces. We had last week, Thursday, Friday, we had about 50 people on digital identities. People from Sovereign were there, Uport, not someone who explained about RS3. And a lot of people, really 50 people, talking about how are we going to create these digital identities, not only for private persons and legal entities, but also for objects. That's a challenge. If we are successful, we set a world standard. And the reality is a lot of people in the world are working on it. Sovereign is working on it, Uport is working on it. There is one nice one typical situation in the Netherlands, because the Dutch culture is rather consensus-minded. I mean, I have also a lot of discussions in Germany, more or less by accident through Fraunhofer. In Germany, the immediately answer is, do we need a blockchain? If Volkswagen does it, then we can trust it. The German culture is extremely hierarchical. They still have problems understanding blockchain. Not everyone. But here in the Netherlands, we have this consensus mind. So it's quite nice to see that multiple ministries are involved in this digital identity discussion. Finance, economics, visa, but also the 4 banks are involved in it. Energy companies are involved in it, because we are facing all the same problems. And this is really where we in the Netherlands can be strong in this kind of cooperation, because if needed, you just drive over in an afternoon and you have the next discussion. Or if you have a scrum, you can come together 2 days a week and continue on discussing and be the other 3 days at home. In the US, it's really going to the other side of the country. So we do have some advantages in blockchain because of historical reasons that we can cooperate and have this consensus mode. But on the other hand, I also know that in New York and London a lot of activities are ongoing, so it is really a race against time who's going to win this. But at least this is all happening. I mentioned I guess the slides will be available later on. Now it's time for questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Egbert Jan. And do a lot of. It's a very good mix of some fundamental understanding, and sometimes we think we know and we realize we missed some of the fundamentals. So thanks for that refresher, and then also stretching our thinking. Questions? Our thinking is all too stretched still. Okay, go ahead.
If you go back to one of these slides where you sort of show an evolution from hardware to software, and eventually end up substituting basically the business model of Google and Airbnb.
Yeah.
How is anybody going to make money there? Because it's quite easy to understand how Google makes money. How do you make money there?
Who's going to make money with Bitcoin? I mean, if you cut out all the middlemen, okay, they're losing their job. And what blockchain will do for the office environment. Now I have to be careful because I don't want to see the phrasing next day in the newspaper. So if anybody does it, please help me out because I get some problems then. But what blockchain is going to do for the office environment, robots this on the work floor. The initial interpretation of people is it's a lot of unemployment, but those companies who did invest in robots are larger. Van der Leegte, Netcar, Philips, Drachten, they're really much larger thanks to the robots. But others lost their job. I mean, if you don't invest, you lose your job. And that's also for the office environment, the banking environment. All those middlemen, either they invest in blockchain and create new type of businesses, or they will lose their job. And especially in banking, because there is a huge amount of legacy which we can remove out of it. Of course, the banks are so large that all the fintechs who think, oh, we'll blow them off the market all of a sudden. The banks are so large in lobbying, taxi drivers aren't, so Uber could get a position in it, but the banks will really, opeten, digest these fintechs. But in reality, over the next 10 years, banks will do it with a lot of less people, in the sense that they practically become a computing center with a Marmara entrance.
But still, how do they make money then?
Well, even now is how does a miner or a validator make money? Because he gets a little bit of transaction fee. A little bit. But it is not anymore that there is an Uber or an Airbnb which from every transaction takes some dollar in the pockets, some guy in America. And here the taxi driver gets much less. But I agree completely with you. What are we going to do with all the people whose jobs are going to change? And that's if I get 1 minute more. This is really my challenge at this moment. I'm running the Smart Industry program in the Netherlands. A Smart Industry is Industry 4.0. It's really on the factory floor. We are interconnecting everything with everything. Now the first industrial revolution, steam, in 2080, took 90 years till 1910 with the T-Ford conveyor belt. Those were 3 generations of 30 years, 90 years. So you were doing a little bit less different than what your father was doing. Then the second industrial revolution to the third took about 60 years. 2 generations. From the 60s, 90s with the MFP programming, the robots, we are now in a phase that we have this interconnecting everything to everything in the factory floor. And that's 40 years. The next industrial revolution will be there in 25 years. That's within 1 generation. So everyone above 35 years old, I'm not going to ask who is above 35 years old here, but everyone about 35 years old, 20 years ago, did not got internet at school. And we now know that for those people, it's now Internet of Things. That's interconnecting everything to everything. We get artificial intelligence and blockchain in the next 5 years. We'll have quantum computing in 10 years' time. So we can predict a little bit what will happen in the next 10 years. And those people are 45 years old, still have to do 25 years work. So So the conclusion is there pretty simple. We never ever had before in mankind that everyone who has a job now will have a fundamentally different job within 10, 20 years, where they are not trained for. It's not only in industry, the smart industry, it's also in smart health. How do we do it with nurses? How do we do it in transport with taxi drivers? How do we do it with our complete society to retrain everyone for other jobs in the next 10, 20 years, because they will never get their pension based on what they are doing today. That's a social challenge, far beyond the mania on bitcoins and things like that.
Okay, let's do 2 more questions. I know people are also waiting for break. I think the first person was in the back there. Yeah.
What role do you see for public blockchains? So the examples you gave were consortium blockchains. They have some technology in common with current public blockchains, but they are driven by a totally different mechanism.
I'll try to do it very short. It's a permissioned and unpermissioned.
Yeah.
At this moment, I think a lot of players will start with permissioned. Let it take place. Ultimately, you have to realize that you want to have it on an unpermissioned blockchain in the end. So whatever you do, realize that it really has sense if you have it in an unpermissioned blockchain, because then you can also include the partners who you cannot trust upfront. And in permissioned, you trust everyone on it. That's the shortcut answer.
Okay. You also touched on the aspect of the GDRP in 2018, right? So, but the whole point of blockchains is that they are decentralized, right? So, who is the government going to go after in an event of an hack or breach of personal data?
No one knows. I just had it in the pre-discussion as well, a little bit. How are we going to do that there? Well, the only thing I can say, put on the blockchain only the transaction and as less as possible. Even if it's nanocomputers, or quantum computing, we are able to crack all kinds of encryptions of today in 10 years' time. No one can predict, but if it happens, it's become pretty clear. So it's still a challenge, because then, who is responsible for putting your information, your all kinds of preferences is on the internet, and now they can decode it all of a sudden. No one knows.
Okay. Last question here, and then we'll do a break. We'll take maybe 10 minutes this time, so we can continue the questions up front for additional questions. Yeah, go ahead.
If we have Bitcoin, why do we need banks?
But you still have the exchanges, Bitcoin exchanges.
Yeah, but that's not a bank.
I think in the long run, that's why I said the bank is just a computing center with a marmer entrance. I think a possibility for a bank would be this e-wallet, this sovereign wallet you have to maintain yourself. But if you lose it, you lose your Bitcoins, you lose your house, your driving license, you lose everything. That can't happen. So what you need to do is you probably have to store it at 3 different places, and if you lose it, that at least you can go to 2 places and recollect it, or have 10 friends, and if 8 or 7 of the friends give their piece back, you can reconstruct your wallet. That's the kind of things the bank of 20 years from now would be a service they can provide. A kind of security mechanism that if you lose yourself, then they can establish it again.
But if you lose your wallet nowadays, you lose your money anyway.
Yeah, but if there is also your property of your house, your car keys, your bitcoins, if you have Ether, it's a little bit worse than just using a wallet with 10 euros and a chip card in it.
Maybe you mentioned the first killer application on blockchain is Bitcoin. What for you is the runner-up? What was the second one after Bitcoin?
Ether?
Ether.
I mean the smart contracts.
Yeah.
It's extremely dangerous to have autonomic programs. I know how many bugs there can be in programs.
Right.
But it is a great idea.
So in that sense, the markets have some logic behind it. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. We'll take 10 minutes and then. you still have